Next, we will focus on developing the logic for creating a new item within the to-do management model. Let's add the CreateTodoItem function, which takes a to-do data array as input and also returns an array. Create to-do model instance using to-do factory. If the to-do data contains an ID, we will retrieve the to-do model data from the resource model. Invoke the reload function from the resource model, passing the to-do and item ID as arguments. Begin adding the data accordingly. Let's format the update date and time using the datetime library. To achieve this, create a datetime instance and inject the datetime dependency. Eliminate the empty string and then call the empty date function using the datetime instance. If the description is defined, set its value accordingly. Next, we will set the customer ID for to-do item. Lastly, invoke the save function from resource model and pass the to-do instance as an argument. Afterwards, retrieve the to-do items using the getTodoItems method. Specify customer ID and to-do ID as arguments. Let's simplify the code by creating an AbstractController class. Copy all instances except for TodoManagement to the AbstractController class. Time to inject the dependencies and instance assignment. Return the request instance using getRequest method with the protected accessor. Now do the same for rest of instances. Return JSON result instance. Afterward, we will return the user context interface instance. Return JSON serializer instance. Within the index folder, let's proceed with creating the AbstractTodo class. Furthermore, extend it from the AbstractController class that we recently created. Here we will create an instance of the to-do management model, and then we will return it using a protected method. So let's create getTodoManagement method with the protected accessor, and then return the TodoManagement instance. Now open the getController and extend it from newly created AbstractTodo class. Now we don't need to create instances here, so remove them. Replace the instances with intended methods. Directly return the result without creating JSON variable. Now let's add CreateController. Extend it from AbstractTodo class and then implement account interface. and HTTP post action interface to allow post request only. Now implement interface execute method. Before implementing logic for controller, let's do front end for create action. So now open TodoManager.js model. Let's proceed by creating a new function called saveItem. It should take item object argument. We will add its logic later in a moment. Now create send post request action.js file. This will also be a generic action file similar to the send get request action file. Time to add required dependencies. First we need mid storage dependency, then screen loader, and finally we need the error processor dependency. Begin with starting the loader. Now let's specify the parameters we need. The action.js will accept service URL, payload, and default parameters. Call and return the storage post function, specifying its parameter accordingly. First specify service URL, then serialize a payload object to JSON string. Specify true to keep the request global, and content type is the application JSON. Now let's specify logic for request completion. If deferred is not undefined, resolve it and pass response argument to it. And then finally stop the screen loader. Now let's write failure scenario as well. Now process error using error processor and pass response as an argument to it. If deferred is not undefined, then call reject function and pass response object to it. Forcefully stop the screen loader. Now go back to todo-manager.js file and let's add logic to the saveItem function. Self is going to be current instance. Then before creating service URL, we need to add mid URL dependency. Specify CreateController path, and then create preload object. We need to resolve the item object as it could contain observable properties as well. So let's go ahead and create item resolver.js model. For better clarity, let's create a resolver directory first. Then create item resolver file inside resolver directory. We will only require the underscore dependency. Return the object. Next, include the resolve property containing a function that accepts the item object as a parameter. Create resolve item object, which will be useful to store and return resolved items. Next, we will loop through the item object. Push the key item to resolved item object. If the value type is a function, call it directly, otherwise use it as is. And finally return resolved item object. Now inside TodoManager, include the item resolver as a dependency. So now let's simplify the item object. Create todo key and assign the resolved item object to it. Simply call the resolve function from item resolver and pass item as parameter. Now it's the time to add send post request dependency. Specify the send post request with parentheses and pass service URL and payload respectively, as the send post section returns the post object, so we can consequently define done or fail methods. Once we finish setting up the create controller, we will proceed to add the necessary logic here. So now let's begin adding the create controller logic. Let's first unserialize the request post data. The post data will be retrieved by invoking getContent method using the request object. If data is null or to index is not defined, then return the empty data. Before proceeding with the further logic, let's start by creating a JSON result object. Subsequently, create and assign an array to the JSON object's data. Success will be false. And then specify a custom message. Finally, the data will be an empty array. Now return the JSON result object to render the JSON data. Now let's create the to-do item and populate the JSON data with returned information. Invoke the CreateTodoItem method from TodoManagement model. Specify the to-do data as an argument, and then return the JSON result object. Now let's create a separate method to streamline the retrieval of request data. So open the AbstractController. First create a protected array property named postData. Now create a method _get unserialized postData and begin adding data retrieval logic. If the post data is found to be empty, assign it the value of unserialized data and then return the property. Now open the create controller and replace the serialized lines of code with the method _get unserialized post data. Next, we will simplify the response data by moving it into a new method. So inside AbstractController, create method return JSON response. The method will require an argument in the form of array data. Get JSON result object and set the response data object into it, and finally return the JSON object. Now let's create the failure response method as well. This method will accept a message string and some optional array data. Now we will simply call the return JSON response method and retrieve a prepared JSON response. Provide the relevant array data. Success will be false. Then specify message data. In case if message data is empty, let's specify a custom string instead. And then specify the data. So now open create controller and simplify the response data. Call return error response method, and then we don't need to do anything else. Inside AbstractController, let's make the message string optional. Next, create success response method. It will accept array as an optional argument. Call return JSON response method. Specify array parameter. Success will be true. Then we have success message. And finally specify the data. Now let's modify the create controller accordingly. Simply invoke the return success response method. CreateTodoItem method will return the data. No need for additional JSON object. Before processing to-do data, we need to make sure customer ID is present. Retrieve the customer ID from user context instance. Open the TodoManager.js model. Now is the time to resolve the saveItem function response. We can loop through the data items. We will choose underscore each loop. Push the response item to to-do array. Now open the to-do component. Save to-do form now needs to be refactored. So let's go ahead and clean it up. Remove all of the additional logic except validation and model. All we need to do is to call saveItem from TodoManager and pass to-do object as an argument. Flush the cache and clear the static or generated content. Reload the page. Now let's create a new to-do item. Click Save button to add item. Upon refreshing the page, we can observe newly created item appearing as expected. But if we edit existing item, we see an additional item is created when the item is saved. However, refreshing the page will show modified items correctly. So let's go ahead and fix this issue. Open TodoManager.js file. Now let's find convert to observables function. Inside the object assignment, typecast item ID to integer. We need parsing because the returned IDs are in string format. Now flush the cache and remove static and generated content. Reload the page. Now let's modify the to-do item. This time to-do item updated as expected. So now we are good to go with delete operation. So now open TodoManagement model. Let's start with creating the deleteTodoItem method. This method will consist of the to-do item logic and accepts to-do item ID as a parameter. Create to-do model instance. Then load the items using to-do ID. Provide them to-do model instance in first parameter and ID in second parameter. If ID is not found, then return false. Invoke delete method from resource model and pass the to-do item object as a parameter. And finally return true. Now go ahead and create deleteController. Extend from AbstractTodo class and implement account interface. Retrieve the post data in the form of array. If data is empty or if item ID is not provided, then return the error response. Now create a try catch block to handle the thrown exception in a case. We will modify the response success value by calling delete operation from TodoManagement model class. Pass to ID as an argument. Return error message response and catch block. Finally, return the success response and pass response variable as an argument. Now is the time to tweak the front-end TodoManager.js model. Begin by creating deleteItem method, which accepts item object as an argument. Create service URL using deleteTodoItem path. Then create payload object. This object will hold request data. Create to-do ID property within the payload object and assign the value from the item object. Now it is time to send the request. Use send post request action to send request to the server. The first parameter is going to be service URL and second is payload object. Let's now implement our custom logic Once request has been successfully completed, if response success property is false, then display an alert message and break further execution. Alternatively, use the remove function from to-do array to eliminate the item. Compare the to-do ID with the item ID, hence the matching item will be removed. So according to this approach, when success is false, no changes will be applied on front end as well. While in other case, we will process a removal action. Now open to-do component and let's update the delete action. Replace the to-do item removal lines with deleteItem method using TodoManager instance. Specify todo-item object as a parameter. Now let's test the changes. Flush the cache and remove static or generated content. Let's create a new item. Then delete the newly created item. Item has been removed successfully. Now let's verify by reloading the page. So the item was removed successfully. Now let's remove all items. Everything seems good. However, we still have an issue with to-do items. If we keep description of an item empty, a front-end exception is thrown during a detection. So let's resolve this exception. Open to-do component, modify the addTodo method. If description value is null, convert into an empty string to avoid the validation issue. Now flush the static or generated content. Reload the page now. Now try editing the item. No exception thrown this time. So now the issue has been resolved. Test with adding and removing items with and without the description. That's all. We are done with the to-do manager. In our next video, we will continue with the task manager. If you are new to the channel, please subscribe